السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. إن شاء الله تعالى the dars today, inshallah, briefly we'll talk about the different roles that a Muslim woman would have in her life, as exactly also like the men. Each one of us, we have different roles that we play in our life, meaning that you are, from a sister's perspective, you are a wife, you are a daughter, you are a sister, you are part of a community with your friends, for example, things like this. And each state that a person is in, there is ilm for us to learn and to act upon it. And this ilm is, of course, the wahy from Allah, the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ that govern our life. And this ilm that is related to the wahy, to the revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we are commanded to have that state of submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's what al-ilm is. Because ilm, knowing, and once a person knows, what's left is the full submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to seek rewards from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the hereafter. And therefore, when it comes to this, I would advise myself and everyone again, since, and I hope that everybody, inshallah ta'ala, would listen attentively, inshallah. It's not going to be for a long period of time, but it's very important that this is a talk that I'm addressing, again, the women, because sometimes when we talk about something, people would say, how about the husband, or how about the men? What should be said to them? But this is a different setup. So assuming, of course, that men, they know what they're supposed to be doing, but when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands us to do something, this is our responsibility. This is what we will be asked about. So, for example, when we talk about the woman being a wife, a Muslim wife, and the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that came and talked about the right of the husband upon his wife, and how that this right is such a great right, and there's no one that has right upon the woman more than her husband, more than even her parents. And this is by the Shara, this is by the deen of Allah. So this is not for the husband, this is by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when we talk about these rights, and that's because of the hadith of the Prophet that came, the more the person learned, the more the person would see how perfect this religion is, and how it perfect our life to fulfill the ubudiyah, or the purpose of our life, which is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. And it's not based on the desires of the people, but based on what is perfect and what is right in every single matter in our life, and one of which is the relationships. So since when it comes to the different roles that makes a difference between a man and a woman, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave the women the rewards for what the men do, especially if it's her husband, if he goes to the masjid, if he goes for jihad fi sabilillah, if he goes for hajj and umrah, if he, all of these things that requires effort, she gets all of this by being at home, being a wife, being as again fulfilling the rights of her husband, and with the different rights to be observed. This is something that we have to reflect upon. And for example, that a few days back, people were asking, they were in Mecca, and for every salah comes, for people to go to the haram and to come back, it's a lot of effort. It's very crowded and it's very hot. And for as far as the rewards are concerned, if the wife, she's staying in the hotel room, in the air-conditioned room, in a comfortable place, and she's praying there, she's not praying Jama'ah, she doesn't have to pray Jama'ah. Of course, if she wants to go to the masjid, no one should prevent her from going to the masjid, the Masjid al-Haram. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said, "La tamna'u ima Allah Masajid Allah do not prevent the women from going to the masajid. But I'm just saying, if when it comes to the rewards and the thawab, if she chooses to pray in her place and she does not pray jama'ah, in which the man he has to leave and he has to go and has to go through the effort and the heat of the outside and so on, all of that to get to relieve himself from the punishment of Allah if he misses Salatul Jama'ah. Because Salatul Jama'ah is wajib, is obligatory upon him. So let alone, I mean, this is the reward is something else. This is to save himself from the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He has to put all of that effort to pray the 5 daily prayers, in which for her, she gets all of this reward in the comfort of her home. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most just. From someone looking at the end of things, a person would say, but isn't that something that a woman is of a higher level than men? They are preferred more than men because they do less and they get the same rewards. The answer is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most wise. There is another area of struggle and striving that the woman has to apply in her life that is different than the man, but for her that she has, everybody has to strive. يا الإنسان إنك كادح إلى ربك كدحا فملاقيه. Her striving and struggling in her life that compensate for this is when it comes to fulfilling the rights of her husband. Because she's commanded to make her salah, she's commanded to give zakah, she's commanded with the halal and the haram are the same for both men and women, and so on. So what makes the difference here is that if she's married, the right of her husband is a great right. It's a huge right, and that right is there's a level of struggle there. Why? Because she has to be obedient to her husband. She has to be kind to her husband. Regardless, again, we're not talking about the husband now. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He talked about that relationship, and He said, الرجال قوامون على النساء بما فضل الله بعضهم على بعض وبما أنفقوا من أموالهم فالصالحات قانتات حافظات للغيب بما حفظ الله. الرجال قوامون على النساء. Men are قوامون, القوامة, that means they are in charge. بما فضل الله بعضهم على بعض, with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made them superior over one another. وبما أنفقوا من أموالهم, and with what they spend from their money. But then when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned the women, فالصالحات, the righteous women. قانتات, that means أي مطيعات لأزواجهن. That means they're obedient to their husbands. So she's righteous between her and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the rights of Allah, the ibadah of Allah. And qanitat, the next quality is mentioned, that means she is, or they are obedient to their husbands. حافظات للغيب بما حفظ Allah, they guard the matters of al-ghayb, meaning with regards to her chastity, her relationship with her husband, and so on. And the hadith of the Prophet والسلام, when he was asked والسلام, أي النساء خير? Who are the best of the women? And the question, assuming that with he's been asked والسلام, أي النساء خير? So أي النساء خير, who is the best among the women? His answer والسلام, is not going to be with the things that are both men and women are commanded to do. So this is something unique for women. So he said, الذي تسره إذا نظر, the one that he is pleased with when he sees her, when he look at her. So when the husband looks at his wife, he's pleased, meaning that she's not frowning at his face, she's not acting in a way that is not pleasing. So when he sees her, he's pleased. وتطيعه إذا أمر, and if he commands, she obeys him. ولا تخالفه في نفسها ولا مالها بما يكره, and she does not oppose him or go against him with regards to herself or her wealth with what he dislikes. So this is, and the hadith is reported by Imam al-Nasa'i, Imam Ahmad, and others, and it's a sound hadith. So this is the best of the women. And also when Husayn ibn Muhsin رضي الله عنه, he said, حدثتني عمتي, my aunt told me, أتيت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم في بعض الحاجة. I came to the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام in something that she came to ask the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام for. So فقال أي هذه أذات بعل, oh so and so, calling her, are you having a husband? أذات بعل, do you have a husband? قلت نعم, I said yes. So he says كيف أنت له, how are you towards him? كيف أنت له, how are you to your husband? So she said ما آلوه إلا ما عجزت عنه. ما آلوه, that means I would never be short than being obedient and serving. That means I'm doing the best I can so that I'm the best towards him. Unless I'm not able to. إلا ما عجزت عنه. Unless I'm not able, physically to do it. Then the Prophet ﷺ said to her, فانظري أين أنت منه فإنما هو جنتك ونارك, which means look, where are you towards him? Look at you. If you want to see who you are, look at yourself with regards to your husband, because indeed he is your Jannah and he is your hellfire. And the words of the Prophet ﷺ, this is wahy from Allah, and the words are very precise and very clear. فإنما هو جنتك ونارك. He is your Jannah and he is your hellfire. That means what? And this is a sound hadith reported by Imam Ahmad and others, and it's a sound hadith. That means the husband is the gate for the woman, either to the Jannah if he's pleased with her, or to the hellfire if he's not pleased with her بالحق, with the truth, of course. If he's displeased with her because she's obedient to Allah, that's his problem, right? So, and that's why والطاعة, which is, we don't have to keep on mentioning this because it's an obvious thing. الطاعة لا تكون إلا بالمعروف. الطاعة cannot, or the obedience, it's only with matters of the ma'ruf, matters that is known. It's not beyond her capacity, and it's not something that is in sinful means or so. Because if he orders his wife, or he wants her to commit a sin, and of course this is not permissible for her to obey him, otherwise she becomes sinful. لا طاعة لمخلوق في معصية الخالق. There's no obedience for any makhluk, for any creation of Allah, in disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is, a very obvious thing, of course, and he would be sinful in that case. So, but here the Prophet ﷺ, he made that first quality that is for the woman to be praised for, is that her obedient to her husband, which is makes her righteous. So what makes a man righteous, as we heard, is many, many, many different things. But what makes a Muslim woman righteous, the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that are observed in an easy way, to pray at home, she doesn't have to pray jama'ah, these types of things. And with that is the rights of her husband that is always mentioned there. And this is the right, and that's why the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, إذا صلت المرأة خمسها وصامت شهرها وحصنت فرجها وأطاعت زوجها قيل لها ادخلي الجنة من أي أبواب الجنة شئت. This is for a Muslim woman, righteous, that she wants to enter the Jannah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. She's not concerned by the manipulation of the disbelievers or the evil ones that want to divert her away from what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from her. And she wants the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Prophet ﷺ said, if the woman prays her 5 daily prayers, fasts the month of Ramadan, protects her private parts, her chastity, أطاعت زوجها, and she is obedient to her husband, she will be told, enter the Jannah from any of the gates of Jannah you would wish to enter. So, and this is hadith also reported by Imam Ahmad and others, and it's a sound hadith. So these hadith and more of these hadith shows again this right that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he made it in such a way for people to preserve the religion, for the benefit of the family, for all kinds of goodness. And on the other side, when you would see how Iblis and the helpers of Iblis, they would try to disturb this peace and this harmony in the Muslim families by causing these drifts and these disputes and things like this, by making the men disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by committing sins and not fulfilling the commands of Allah and by not being kind to his wife. Because on the other side, of course, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, "Istawsu bin nisa'i khayra," be kind to the women. إِذَا جَاءَكُم مَّن تَرْضَوْنَ دِينَهُ وَخُلُقَهُ فَزَوِّجُوهُ. If one comes to you asking for marriage and you're pleased with his religion and his manners, why would the Prophet ﷺ mention manners with the religion, even though the religion already included in it the manners? We know the manners from the religion, but why the khuluq is mentioned? Because if a woman is commanded, as we heard, to be obedient to her husband, the rights of her husband more than anything else, and so on. So imagine when she's like this and she's obedient to Allah, and she wants to fulfill the rights of Allah, and then her husband has bad manners, it becomes a very difficult situation for her. So that's why it's her right, and this is the duty of her guardian and so on, is to make sure that he is, the one that one's intended for marriage and so on, and someone that is pleased with his religion and his manners, so that he does not humiliate her, he treats her in the perfect way, and things like this. But again, going back to how these hadith, and the hadith of Abi Hurairah radiallahu anhu, أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم, when he entered one of the gardens of the people of Al-Ansar, and there were two camels that are disturbed and moving in a very strange way, and they keep on hitting things and things like that. So the Prophet ﷺ, he came close to them. The hadith says فوضع جرانهما بالأرض. That means they put the bottom of their necks on the ground. That means they came down on the ground after they were fighting and disturbing and everything. And when the camels are in that state, it's very difficult to control. So once the Prophet ﷺ came close to them, so they kind of put themselves on the ground and they put their necks on the ground. So those who were with the Prophet ﷺ, they said to the Prophet ﷺ, "Nasjudu lak." Should we make sujood to you, O Prophet of Allah? And they saw the camels did that. So the Prophet ﷺ, he said, ما ينبغي لأحد أن يسجد لأحد ولو كان أحد ينبغي له أن يسجد لأحد لأمرت المرأة أن تسجد لزوجها لما عظم الله عليها من حقه. Which means it is not befitting for anyone to make sujood to anyone. And if it had to be someone that would make sujood to anyone, it would have been the woman. I would have commanded her to make sujood to her husband. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, lima عظم Allah, because of how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exalted his rights upon her. So of course it's it's haram, it's shirk to make sujood to other than Allah. But you see how the context of the hadith, how that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exalted the rights of her husband upon her. And if I would have commanded anyone to make sujood to anyone, which is of course forbidden, it would have been the woman towards her husband. And the Prophet also, the same meaning of the same hadith, he said عليه الصلاة والسلام, لو كنت آمرا أحدا أن يسجد لغير الله, if I would have commanded anyone to make sujood to other than Allah, لأمرت المرأة أن تسجد لزوجها, I would have commanded the woman to make sujood to her husband. And then he says, والذي نفس محمد بيده, by the one that the soul of Muhammad is in his hands, لا تؤدي المرأة حق ربها حتى تؤدي حق زوجها كله. A woman would never fulfill the rights of her Lord till she fulfill all of the rights of her husband. حتى لو سألها نفسها وهي على قتب لم تمنع. Even if he asks her to be with him and she is على قتب, and she is by the even on the on a camera, so that she would not prevent herself from being with her. That means even if she is in such a difficult state, she would still be obedient to him and fulfill his desire. So this is how the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, again, because of this, the haqq, the right that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it. So this is when we talk about these things, and again with all sincere advice, but you would find people are of two categories in this. and again, I'm repeating this over and over again, this is a woman lecture. So assuming that no men are listening to this and it's only the sisters. So when sisters, for example, they hear this, either someone would have righteousness and obedient to Allah, and that would make her, want to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and she knows that this is where her area of struggle and being patient and being obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and she would love the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is what he wants from her, versus someone that would say, why is this is the case, or what if the husband would take advantage of this, and all these types of things, right? Which is something that, yeah, definitely the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala dealt with it, but when we even use reason, you won't find anyone talk like this when it comes to when people go to work. When people go are hired by someone to work for them, they don't say, "What if the boss is this or that?" They listen and they fulfill whatever their job description is. And if someone is bad, then of course there's ways to deal with this. So yes, definitely, of course. I mean, if a woman is being, for example, if her husband, what's the level where she can be patient with, and if not every dispute, then it becomes amplified. If and this is the ulama, they talk about, if a husband, for example, beat his wife up, that's ground for divorce. This is not permissible. No doubt about these matters. Of course, we're not talking about this, but again, this is the when you hear these commands, it's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if someone is not fulfilling what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered them to do, this is their sinful life. So, if a man is not fulfilling the commands of Allah, if he's not kind to his wife, this is his sinful life. He needs to repent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from it. But that does not justify, for example, for the woman not to fulfill the rights of her husband and to be obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by being obedient to her husband and things like this. And this is where, the many different good manners with being content, with being away from, anything that is less than what is being mentioned. And this is part of the, again, submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there's one of these narrations also, the Prophet ﷺ, it's repeated in many different narrations, where لو أمرت أحدا أن يسجد لأحد لأمرت المرأة أن تسجد لزوجها. The hadith of Aisha radiallahu anha. The same thing, if I would have commanded anyone to make sujood to anyone, I would have commanded the woman to make sujood to her husband. ولو أن رجلا أمر امرأته أن تنقل من جبل أحمر إلى جبل أسود أو من جبل أسود إلى جبل أحمر لكان نولها أن تفعل. And if a man commanded his wife to move from this red mountain to a black mountain, or from a black mountain to a red mountain, لكان نولها, that means it would have been then her rights أن تفعل, that she would do so. Yani if you tell her to move the stones from this mountain to this mountain, which is basically nonsense, it would have been her right to do so. I mean, to do what her husband, of course, would tell her to do. And the hadith of Abu Sa'id al-Khudri radiallahu anhu, he said a man came with his daughter to the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he said, "Inna ibnati hadi abad an tatazawwaj." He said to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, my daughter, she's refusing to get married. So the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam said to her, "Ati'i abaki," be obedient to your father. So she said, "والذي بعثك بالحق لا أتزوج حتى تخبرني ما حق الزوج على زوجتي." She said to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, by the one that sent you by the truth, I would never get married till you inform me what is the right of the husband upon his wife. She's asking the Prophet ﷺ this. So the Prophet ﷺ, he said, حق الزوج على زوجته أن لو كانت به قرحة فلحستها أو انتثر من خراه صديدا أو دما ثم ابتلعته ما أدت حقه. He said the right of the husband upon his wife, that if he has a pus and she licks it, or there is pus coming from his nose, or blood, and she swallowed that, she would not fulfill his rights. So she said to the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام, والذي بعثك بالحق لا أتزوج أبدا. She said, by the one that sent you by the truth, I would never get married. So the Prophet ﷺ, he said, لا تنكحوهن إلا بإذنهن. He said, do not get them married except by their permission. Do not force them to get married. And this is reported by Imam Al-Hakim and others, and it's a sound hadith. But the point here is, knowing that this is the right of her husband, are you willing to get into that relationship? And did the Prophet ﷺ address the men? Of course he did. One of the last words of the Prophet ﷺ in this life, he says, "Istawsu bin nisa'i khayra." Be kind to your women. Be kind to your women. And the Prophet ﷺ is the best example. خيركم خيركم لأهلي وأنا خيركم لأهلي. The best among you are the best to their families, and I'm the best to their family. But this is how the balance in the household is. And if someone is not fulfilling his rights, then one should fulfill his rights, and maybe this is one of the means for the other to observe it. And there are again so many different narrations, one of which, for example, it's and the hadith reported by many, and Sheikh Al-Albani rahimahullah authenticated it. لو تعلم المرأة حق الزوج لم تقعد ما حضر غذاؤه وعشاؤه حتى يفرغ منه. If the woman knows the right of her husband, she would not sit when his lunch is there or his dinner till he ends, till he finish eating. Of course, he's not saying, alayhi salatu wasalam, that the woman should be standing while her husband is eating. He's not saying that. He says if she knows her right, she would have done that. And of course, the relationship is with goodness, with loving and things like this. Of course, it's not a relationship where someone is afraid of the others, but it's showing the rights that it needs to be exalted in the hearts of the people, so that they fulfill the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And also the Prophet, he said عليه الصلاة والسلام يا معشر النساء لو تعلمن حق أزواجكن عليكن لجعلت المرأة منكن تمسح الغبار عن وجه زوجها بنحر وجهها. O women, he was addressing the women عليه الصلاة والسلام. He was talking to the women, not talking to the men. He was talking to the women. He said to them, if you know the right of your husbands upon you, one of you would wipe the dust from the face of her husband with her face. And one of the three people that the salah is not accepted, if a woman, the night comes and her husband he sleeps while he's angry with her. And this is, to show again the right of the husband, and a woman can never be among those who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with unless her husband is pleased with her. So this and more, of course, of the hadith, and we mentioned this hadith before, which is, again, it requires effort, yes. And this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from the woman, to be in that level of righteousness. As the Prophet ﷺ said, أَلَا أُخْبِرُكُمْ بِنِسَائِكُمْ فِي الْجَنَّةِ. Should I inform you of your women in Jannah? They said, yes, O Messenger of Allah. He says, وَدُودٌ وَلُودٌ, the one that gives birth, the one that is loving. إِذَا غَضَبَتْ أَوْ أُسِيَ إِلَيْهِ. If she's angry or she's been, it's the fault of her husband. أَوْ غَضِبَ زَوْجُهَا, or her husband is angry. She would say, هذه يدي في يدك. This is my hand in your hand. لا أكتحل بغمض أي لا أنام حتى ترضى. I would never I would never sleep till you are pleased with me. This is the religion. This is فَضْفَرْ بِذَاتِ الدِّينِ. This is the meaning of be or get the merit to the one of religion. As the Prophet ﷺ said, فَضْفَرْ بِذَاتِ الدِّينِ تَرِبَتْ يَدَكَ. That the religious woman is the one that has this level of obedience to Allah, because this is what the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. And of course, the more the husband is religious, of course, the more that his rights is more. And that's why, because if someone is obedient to Allah, if the husband is steadfast upon the deen of Allah, that means he's going through so much struggle outside of his house to be obedient to Allah, to lower his gaze, to be kind to others, to face all kinds of things, especially at the times of fitan. Then he needs that support and this help from his wife at home. And all of that, the husband and the wife, and all of this to establish the deen. It's not because of one is favored more than the other or this. It's to establish the deen of Allah. It's to go back and see how things were at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. We're living at times now when even this relationship between husband and wife is mentioned. You would find all kinds of apologetic attitude to please others and to make us look and seem and act like everyone else. No, we are Muslims. We're different. We have wahi, we have Quran and Sunnah that governs our life. And it's all kinds of things that would make people just, and that's why when we have all these levels of divorce and all kinds of, families are being, ties are being severed and things like this because of not understanding the nature. What's the purpose of this? What's the household is based upon? It's the obedience of Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and more, of course, to be mentioned. But I don't want to keep you long, inshallah. And I know that there might be some questions. So I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He make us and give us the understanding of the religion of Islam the way that is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And hopefully, inshallah, after this is mentioned, I know that there might be questions, but it's to be understood in the proper way so that we fulfill the commands of Allah, inshallah. Barakallahu fiik. طيب, inshallah, we'll continue, inshallah ta'ala, next time. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He bless our families and bless our communities and to make us steadfast upon the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.